She looks harmless. A soft voice, a nervous smile, almost childlike. The kind of person you instinctively trust. Someone who doesn't seem capable of doing anything wrong. But investigators were not focused on what she was saying. They were watching how she said it. The pauses, the tone shifts, the way certain answers came too easily, and others didn't come at all. Because within minutes something felt off. Not obvious, not dramatic, just slightly wrong. This is the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. For most of her life she was seen as a victim. A girl suffering from multiple serious illnesses. She used a wheelchair. She appeared physically weak. She depended completely on her mother. People felt sympathy for her. Neighbors helped. Charities supported her. Doctors treated her. Everything about her life reinforced one idea: that she was sick, that she needed protection, that she needed care. But there was one problem. None of it was real. The illnesses were fabricated. Not by strangers, not by doctors, but by her own mother. Her mother suffered from a rare psychological condition known as Munchausen by proxy, a disorder where a caregiver creates or exaggerates illness in another person, usually a child, not for money, not for survival, but for attention, for sympathy, for control. Over time, the lie became reality. Doctor visits became routine. Medications became normal. The wheelchair became permanent. And slowly something deeper started happening. Her identity began to change. When a child grows up being told they are sick, they don't question it. They accept it. They adapt to it. And eventually, they become it. Years pass like this. Every decision controlled. Every movement monitored. She wasn't allowed to grow independently. She wasn't allowed to question anything. Even basic choices were not hers to make. This kind of control doesn't just affect behavior. It affects the brain. It changes how a person understands reality. What is true, what is false, what is allowed, and what is not. At first, the response is resistance, confusion, fear, discomfort. But over time, resistance becomes adaptation. The brain finds ways to survive, even if that means learning behaviors that were never meant to exist. She learned how to act weak, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. She learned how to appear innocent, because that's what people expected to see. She learned how to respond in ways that avoided conflict and maintained control around her. These behaviors were repeated again and again for years until they became automatic. And this is where things begin to shift, because learned behavior does not stay limited to one situation. It evolves. What starts as survival can slowly turn into strategy. Not intentionally, not consciously, but gradually. And that brings us to the moment investigators began to question everything. During interrogation, something stood out. Not a confession, not a mistake, but a pattern. Her tone changed depending on the question. Some answers came quickly, almost rehearsed. Others were delayed, carefully constructed. She avoided direct responses when pressure increased. She redirected attention when needed. She stayed calm in moments where panic was expected. None of this was random. This is what psychologists describe as adaptive deception, a behavior developed over time where lying becomes a tool, not always for harm, but for survival. And that's what makes this case complicated, because she was a victim. There is no denying that. She was controlled, manipulated, conditioned for years. But at the same time, she was not completely unaware. She understood more than people initially believed. She made choices, not always freely, not always clearly, but they were still choices. And that creates a conflict that is difficult to resolve. How do you judge someone who was never given a normal reality? How do you separate learned behavior from intentional action? At what point does survival turn into responsibility? There are no simple answers, because this case exists in a gray area, not black, not white, a place where someone can be both a victim and responsible at the same time. And that is what makes it unsettling, because it challenges how we normally think about people. We prefer clear roles: victim, villain, right, wrong. But reality is rarely that simple. Sometimes people are shaped by circumstances in ways that blur those lines completely. But at the same time, she was not completely unaware. She understood more than people initially believed. She made choices. Not always freely, not always clearly, but they were still choices. And that creates a conflict that is difficult to resolve. How do you judge someone who was never given a normal reality? How do you separate learned behavior from intentional action? At what point does survival turn into responsibility? There are no simple answers, because this case exists in a gray area. Not black, not white. A place where someone can be both a victim and responsible at the same time. And that is what makes it unsettling, because it challenges how we normally think about people. We prefer clear roles: victim, villain, right, wrong. But reality is rarely that simple. Sometimes people are shaped by circumstances in ways that blur those lines completely. And when that happens, understanding the truth becomes much harder than just choosing a side. In the end, this is not just a story about abuse. It is a story about control, about adaptation, and about what happens when someone grows up inside a reality that was never real to begin with. Because when you spend years living inside a lie, you don't just believe it. You learn how to survive within it. And sometimes, you learn how to use it. The real question is not what happened. It is why it happened the way it did, and whether the person at the center of it all was ever truly free to become anything else. Or if everything that followed was simply the result of a life that was never under her control to begin with.